We're back with Ismay. Their new album is Desert Pavement, and the song you just heard is called Streaming Family. Um, we'll talk about sort of the loneliness and isolation aspect in a minute, but I think all of us have comfort food of some sort in our lives. And for a lot of it, it can come in the form of entertainment or music. So, when does that when does that reliance on comfort food of that sort become an issue?
It's funny you asked that because I was actually just thinking about that. I was listening to a podcast that's about a subject that's become a lot more popular, which is like dopamine and our addiction to these various things, whether it's social media or watching TV or other substances. And I was just thinking about that because my drug of choice is definitely watching TV. I love watching, comedies especially. And the song is kind of about um it's about how this use of watching TV when we're alone in our apartments or our homes or whatever is sort of like a replacement for being surrounded by community. And to get to your question, when does it become a problem? I mean, I think from listening to the podcast I mentioned, it's sort of when it starts interfering with your functioning, but that's such a spectrum and it's always difficult for me because we all have our vices that make us feel like we can just take a break and let go. But at the same time, sometimes those vices and the desire to just take a break can then end up controlling us and kind of taking over everything. So it's a tricky thing, but I think when we start to notice it's in getting in the way of us dealing with our problems maybe through a healthier way, which is what the song's about really.
Yeah, I would say I don't tend to seek out art that represents comfort, at least from an intellectual perspective. That's I don't know, that's not what art is for me, but literal comfort food can be a problem. Uh,
Yeah, I think you're right. It's different for everybody, and it's interesting. For you, the comfort comes from something other than art. Because for some people, they seek comfort in music. For me, with music, I'm probably similar to you. I seek more like intellectual stimulation and fascination and maybe emotional engagement. And I think something that's a vice is probably something that more allows us to have disengagement. And so, food for some people, TV for me, all kinds of things.
yeah, what are we missing out on if we can't leave our comfort zones from the perspective of socializing, which I know
Yeah.
is what the song was more about?
Yeah. What are we missing on it? It's a great question. It's a cycle that I go through for sure. Um, I think we first cling on to our vices as a way, as something that just draws us in, um, and something that gets us to feel a little bit better. And then the problem is over time as we get more and more acclimated to it, so it doesn't do it anymore. So we engage with the vice more and more until it's kind of taking over our life. But yeah, it's interesting. I think that we nowadays don't spend as much time just with other people and being bored. We don't spend as much time just allowing our emotions and the emotional waves to go up and down. And whenever I've sort of like disconnected from one of my vices, I'm always surprised at the fact that I thought before I let it go that I couldn't live without it. And then I realized that I can actually manage my life without my vice. I can have a meaningful day. I just have to be more willing to embrace the emotional roller coaster that is being a person, I guess.
So here's a mouthful of a question. Um, so you have the shrew in the first song we played facing the bird for going outside of the den. Uh, you have the character who relies on TV as a crutch, probably having to engage some uncomfortable emotions going outside. And then really taking it to the extreme is the family and stranger in the barn. Um, I feel like this album is encouraging getting out there and exploring the world and yourself, but it's not exactly shy about the fact that that isn't necessarily always good or safe. Tell me about that tension.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's so insightful. I never thought about the songs like that, but you're exactly right. Is that we have, this sort of closed offness that's demonstrated with the character in Streaming Family. This kind of person who's muted their emotions, they've isolated themselves, and they're using these vices to to deal. And then you have the Dove, the Shrew, and the Raccoon, where it's talking about kind of getting out of the nest, getting out of the den, and the dangers that we encounter. Um, and I think you're exactly right. Is I think when we're isolating ourselves or numbing our feelings, it's because it's overwhelming to accept and address the complexity and the intensity of the real world, of the fact that there is suffering and there is going to be disappointment, there's going to be pain, and we're going to make mistakes. I think a lot of times we may be isolating ourselves because, or using a vice to not feel things because the intensity of the world, the mistakes we make, the people that hurt us are so difficult to deal with, and sometimes and we turn to something else. But I guess what we can learn too is that we can decide. You can live in the real world where you have to deal with all of the difficult things that happen, or you can live in the virtual world, in the numbed out world. And that's just a challenge I deal with as a person. I mean, that's a huge part of, I think, our modern issues, but for me in particular, as a person, I think about all the time. And so I think it's insightful what you said about the songs, because this is just an internal battle that I'm having with myself all the time of how much to put myself out there. I think, especially as a musician, there's a lot of, as an artist, there's a lot of rejection and complicated feelings that come with putting yourself out there. And, I'm always dealing with the decisions of how much to do that.
Let's go from that really deep actual question to a little more of a silly one. What would you do for real if you're working on the ranch and you see a strange man in the barn?
Uh, that's a great question. I mean, for real, the story of that I wrote in the song is aspirational. It's almost like a child's allegory in sense of this is what the best version of us does, which is to be open-minded. But I think if I actually walked up to the barn and there was a stranger in there, sleeping, I would probably just freeze up and maybe start freaking out and maybe scream. So, I would hope in my best self would go out there and make sure to, de-escalate the situation. But I think given a real life scenario, I don't know what I'd do exactly, but I'd probably freak out.
That's fair. All right, we're gonna hear "Stranger in the Barn." Ismay, and the new album is "Desert Pavement." Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. It's been a blast talking to you. I appreciate you really listening to the songs and having such insightful questions.